Today is the start of a brand new video series that I'm going to be doing called Storytelling. And for this episode of Storytelling, I am going to tell you guys a story about the lore of one of my favorite Black Ops 2 Zombies maps called Mob of the Dead, taking place on Alcatraz Island in San Francisco, California in 1933. Now let's begin. The story involves four mobsters named Salvatore Sal DeLuca, Michael Finn O'Leary, Billy Handsome, and Albert Weasel Arlington. In the 1920s, Sal was a crime lord who was in charge of many operations in the DeLuca crime family. After bribing the Chicago police, he became one of the most respected and feared crime lords in America. To take care of his enemies, Sal hired Billy Handsome to be his hitman, who his enemies taken care of. Sal saw Billy as the son that he never had. To handle his financial stuff and economics, he hired Finn O'Leary, who at the time was an expert gambler, would often bet on horse races, and was married to an actress as well. Eventually, Sal would hire Albert Arlington for his skills of being a con artist. It seemed like things were going smoothly for Sal and his gang, until Billy was arrested for 116 counts of first-degree murder. As for Finn, he and his wife had an estranged relationship. Finn's wife wanted him to sign some divorce papers, but when she was refused, wife then tipped off the Chicago police, and he was arrested for 16 counts of gambling fraud. The Weasel, he was arrested for armed robbery, grand larceny, and many other crimes, but the more important thing was that he was involved in the Los Angeles heist. As for Sal, for being in charge of all those operations and eventually ending someone's life that he loved, he was sentenced to life in prison in Alcatraz. All four of them were sent to Alcatraz. But the Weasel, he didn't plan on staying on Alcatraz forever. So the Weasel, who was the brains of the four, he told his three friends that he came up with a plan to escape Alcatraz. It was a plan that would build a makeshift plane that he nicknamed Icarus out of parts that are around the prison, sheets from the laundry, oxygen tanks from all the way at the docks, a pair of engines, a set of control valves, and rigging. It seemed like all three of them were in on this plan. Billy did stash some parts in the showers. Sal and Finn had a small relationship with a guard named Stanley Ferguson, and things were going smoothly again, because they now had a plan to escape Alcatraz. However, no such plane was ever built, as the idea behind the Icarus plane was only on paper, with the plan falling apart and realized that this was not going to work. Sal, Finn, and Billy's rage consumed their souls, and they plot to kill Weasel as an act of revenge. So on New Year's Eve in 1933, still believing that they were in on the plan, the three lured Weasel to the roof as they were going to build the plane, but little did he know that the three were armed with shivs or makeshift weapons. The three men then brutally killed the Weasel in the dark and cold stormy night on the roof, and the hapless Arlington was left bleeding to death. For their participation in the murder, the three men were sentenced to death by electric chair a month later. But that's when things got weird, because prior to their execution, the prison warden was worshipping an apothecarian named the Shadow Man. The Shadow Man wanted to make Alcatraz into a hell itself, but in order to do that, the Shadow Man had tasked the warden to execute Sal, Finn, Billy, and the Weasel in order to transform Alcatraz into its own pocket dimension. After the three mobsters were executed, the warden was instructed to sacrifice himself by electrocuting himself to death, thus creating the Alcatraz pocket dimension. Back with the four mobsters, they woke up in their cells like normal, having no memory of what happened. It was back onto the night of the escape. Stanley Ferguson was patrolling the cell blocks. He would have a conversation with Sal about his family, Finn about tips from a horse race, not him having a bad relationship with Billy. The Weasel starts like faking an injury. The Weasel lures him into his cell and kills him, taking his key. After unlocking his and their cells, Billy gives them each a revolver. But suddenly, Stanley Ferguson got back up. But he was not himself. He was turned into an undead monster, or a zombie. After they put Stanley Ferguson down, it turns out that the whole prison was being raided by zombies and a demonic warden. They tried to fight him off as much as they could, but they all were killed. However, they didn't exactly die. You see, when a mobster dies, they turn into an astral ghost, which gives them the ability to turn on the electricity and can float for a little bit. But it was only for a short time. After the four got up, seeing what just happened, they stick to the plan. Find the warden's key and build the plane. You see, the plane parts were scattered across the entire prison. Along their quest, they find drawings of guns around the map and even 3 dog heads. And they even see perk machines phasing in and out of reality. Eventually they find all 5 parts for the plane. The sheets, the control valves, the rigging, the pair of engines, and the oxygen tanks. And when they build the plane, it turns out the plane was actually a success. They escaped the island. However, the plane flew right into the Golden Gate Bridge, crashing to the ground. And when they woke up, they see a sign on the bridge that says, "No one escapes alive," written in blood, as well as a pack-a-punch machine that phased in and out of reality itself. Suddenly, they see 4 electric chairs appear, and they have no other choice but to electrocute themselves. But this made them go back to the prison. They realize that something is not right. Using the Hell's Retriever, which was done after feeding the demonic wolf heads, they find a spoon, on the other side of a cell wall, and then they use the Hell's Retriever again to grab the spoon. But after that, they try to escape Alcatraz 2 more times, but this time, fuel cans were scattered across the prison. They try it 2 more times, and then they realize that they're in an endless cycle. So in the Citadel tunnels, they see the mechanism for the elevator was going haywire. So after inputting their prison numbers, the warden then says, "So you want to know the truth?" And he gives them a pair of headphones so that they can listen to these recordings done by Stanley Ferguson.
My name is Stanley Ferguson. I was a guard at Alcatraz from 1933 to 1942. Today, I'm going to give you some insight into one of the more interesting tales from the prison's history. Over the decades, Alcatraz has seen more than its fair share of daring escape attempts. However, few were as audacious as the one undertaken by 4 inmates on New Year's Eve, 1933. Thought to be the brainchild of an inmate by the name of Albert Arlington, the outrageous scheme was as unlikely as its mastermind. It's believed that Arlington, aka the Weasel, somehow convinced 3 other inmates that he had devised a foolproof plan to escape the rock. It was a plan that would see them literally taking to the skies on a makeshift aircraft of Arlington's own design. Just how the Weasel managed to convince these hardened criminals that such a plan was even possible remains a mystery to this day. What is known is that no such plane was ever built. Instead, the group's plans for freedom soon descended into bitter argument and infighting. With the plan falling apart, anger and frustration would ultimately lead to a brutal altercation between the misguided Arlington and his former co-conspirators. Armed only with makeshift weapons, Finn O'Leary, Sal DeLuca, and Billy Handsome lured the unsuspecting Arlington to the roof, where they intended to exact a bloody and violent revenge. And so it was here, beneath the dark and stormy winter skies, that the hapless Arlington met his grisly end, bleeding to death on the cold concrete roof. For their participation in the murder, the 3 collaborators were sent to death by electric chair. Justice came swiftly. On the morning of January 19th, 1934, the execution order was carried out.
The 4 men realized that they died, that the plan didn't work, and now that they remember what happened, why they're even here in this endless cycle. So, after electrocuting themselves, they fly back to the Golden Gate Bridge in their astral forms, and they revive themselves on the bridge. However, things were different this time. It turns out that the Weasel had a connection to the Warden and all the zombies across the prison, and they started to attack Sal, Finn, and Billy, and now they were left with no other option but to fight to the death. If the Weasel ends up being killed in this battle, then the cycle will continue. The whole thing starts all over again, from waking up, finding the Warden's key, building the plane, flying to the Golden Gate Bridge, electrocution, etc. It would all continue on an endless cycle. But if the Weasel manages to kill his 3 former friends, the cycle would break. The Weasel would transform into a blue astral bird that would be free to roam around the prison, while his 3 former friends would be turned into astral ghosts that are also able to roam around Alcatraz. Even though they are free, they are still trapped within this pocket dimension, and they would be like that for 6 whole months. But anyway, if you want to see more storytelling, please let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.